the internet has a carbon footprint roughly equivalent to Germany. And Germany is the 7th biggest polluter in the world, which is pretty shocking for an industry you think has, most people would think, well, there's no real impact to it.
Hello and welcome. I am joined today by Tom Greenwood from Wholegrain Digital. Very excited to have you join us today, Tom. Thank you for coming along.
That's my pleasure.
So it would be great to hear your story. We've had a brief conversation before, and I found it really interesting, your kind of how you got to Wholegrain Digital and kind of what you've been trying to do with it. So please tell us all about your story.
Yeah, sure. So I run a company called Wholegrain Digital, which is a digital agency that my wife and I set up in 2007 with the hope of sort of achieving two things, really. One was to try and help positive organizations, whether they're sort of purpose-led businesses or nonprofits, to use good design and technology to help them fulfill their missions. And the other side of it was kind of a curiosity about sustainable business. There was a lot of talk in the mid-2000s about, well, there was a lot of criticism of business about being kind of environmentally harmful at the center of the environmental crisis, but at the same time there was a lot of kind of green marketing happening, and it really kind of got me curious as to in a way, who should I believe? Are these businesses with all this kind of green marketing really doing something good, or is business just fundamentally damaging to the environment? And this. Basically, I thought, well, at the end of the day, business isn't going anywhere. We need it to be sustainable. And I was really curious about sustainability. I did my undergraduate thesis on sustainable product design. And I thought, well, the best way to find out whether it's possible to run a business in a sustainable way is to start a business and try and do it. And so that's part of the reason why my wife and I set it up together, was not just to do something we cared about and work with these positive organizations, but also just to look at the way that we run a business ourselves. It kind of basically is to stop criticizing other people's businesses and kind of just validate our own ideas and assumptions and see how hard it really is to run a business in a sustainable way.
Yeah, so kind of eat your own dog food, as they say.
Yeah.
How did you find it? What did you learn from that? Is it really difficult to run a sustainable business? What are the big learnings?
Yeah, well, I think, if I'm being honest, I think it is, and I think that there's lots of things people say about sustainability isn't that hard, and a lot of it is good for business. People say, oh, but sustainability is good for business because it saves you money or it improves your brand image and so on. And I think to a large extent, some of that's true. Saving energy, can save a business a lot of money, saving materials, and, good public image is always going to be good for business. But I think that only scratches the surface. And once you've peeled off that layer of paint, and then you actually start to look at what's underneath, the core business operations and what do they do, and the fact that you're operating in a world that you don't control anything outside of your own business. And actually, you start realizing that this is a lot more complicated, because part of the reason we thought we'd go into digital services was because we sort of dematerialize products and services and save the environmental impact of that. And that was a conscious decision in terms of our business model. But most businesses don't have that option. You're making food, or okay, well, it's got to be packaged in something. It's got to be farmed somewhere. It's got to be transported in some way. And most companies don't control that whole infrastructure. They just do their little bit of it. So even if they do their little bit in a really good way, often that's it's just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the environmental impact is happening down the line, and there's sort of systemic issues that they may not have control over. So I increasingly think that it is a lot harder than it's often made out to be. And I'm saying this with 14 years of experience of trying to run it, and us having chosen digital services as our own business model to make it easier for ourselves.
So that's interesting. Before I get on to onto a piece you just mentioned there, the kind of do a little bit piece. You're registered as a B Corp. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Can
that's
you
right.
tell us more about what that means, what you had to do for that, and why you chose to go that way?
Yeah, sure. So we did that. It was our 10th birthday present to ourselves. we thought we've got to do something to mark it. And if I'm being honest, like when I'd heard about B Corps a couple of years before we actually certified, and at first it didn't really mean anything to me, and then it popped up a couple of times, and I just initially kind of assumed that it was just some kind of greenwashing thing. I was a bit cynical, if I'm being honest. And then it was actually one of our clients, Ecover, who certified as a B Corp, and they said to us that this is really good. You should look into it seriously. And so I sat down one day on a Saturday morning, actually, and just had a look at. There's a B impact assessment tool, which is the kind of the assessment tool. It's actually online for free. You can just Google B impact assessment, and you can do the assessment itself without actually, committing to anything, without paying any money. Just use the software online. And I started just going through it out of curiosity, and basically found that it asks a lot of really interesting questions about like the way that you run your business. And some of it was like, yeah, great, and we do this and we do this, and you can kind of feel smug about yourself. But then there's like it asks you questions where you actually realize, well, a lot of it's multiple choice, not all of it, but a lot of it's multiple choice, and a lot of it you look at the answers and you're like, I know what the right answer is, but that's not the one I can tick. And you have to provide evidence for things, so you can't just like flag it. Like you've got to be really honest about like where you are. And I thought, well, actually, this is just a really good process for actually like focusing our minds on how we run our business in a more rigorous way. Until then, we'd sort of been trying to run our business sustainably and sort of socially responsibly in quite an informal, ad hoc way. Small business, you kind of just doing what you think is right, following your gut. And I think, that gets you a long way. But what we found with the B impact assessment was it just really added a layer of rigor to that process and made us kind of just get a bit more serious about it, start tracking things more formally, making sure we knew where we'd documented it. And it kind of, if I'm being honest, it sort of helped us grow up as a business. But the process is basically you do the B impact assessment online, and then you submit, if you want to, you submit it for assessment. And the assessment process, the B Lab is an independent nonprofit, so they're not they don't have any interests other than like making sure that this is done rigorously, and they have sort of experts who assess each application, and they go through your application, they check your evidence, they ask you if they're not satisfied or if they're unsure about your answers and what you've submitted, and then they interview you at the end and kind of do some spot checks on things that you've said. But you have to get, basically there's 200 points maximum through the assessment, and you have to get 80 to pass, and that sounds really easy. Like most people think, oh, you only have to get 80 to pass. All right, yeah, I'll fill in the assessment and I'll get certified. But ask anybody who's done it, and pretty much anybody will tell you getting 80 points is incredibly hard. Like they've intentionally made the assessment very, very difficult. And I think that's the right thing to do, because they're trying to like raise the bar of how businesses are run. So like I think first time around we scraped in like 83 points or something, which was it took us quite a lot of time to like get to that point. And we recently recertified. I think I say recently, it was a year ago, but the last year's disappeared. I think we're 104 or something when we recertified this time. But yeah, it's a very rigorous process. And then once you've got certified, I think one of the best things for us is finding that there's this community of businesses. It's sort of like on the other side of the wall. There's this community of businesses who are really passionate about trying to do things in a better way and are very open about sharing the inner workings of their businesses and the challenges they're having, and helping each other to improve. And I think for us that's been really exciting.
What was, if you want to answer, if you don't want to answer, fine, but What was one of the hardest things for you to adjust in your business to get over that initial 80-point line?
I think one of the big challenges that we had was actually coming from the fact that we'd sort of designed our business model to be kind of inherently intangible. So, we weren't making physical products. So we didn't have any like documentation on the environmental impact of what we were making, which is, something maybe we could talk about in a minute. And then, we're like operating our business sort of semi-remotely. So partly from a co-working space, partly like people distributed working from home. So a lot of the things that normally, like you'd think a traditional business would do, try and run itself in a responsible way, would involve them controlling like the whole environment of the business. And actually, when we went through the assessment, we realized, well, there's so much of it that we just don't physically have control over. We have influence, but we don't have control.
That's a really interesting point, especially in today's world as well. Recently, I published an article about kind of the impact of this new distributed way of working, and I did an interview with a professor from Zurich University on his work about trying to quantify the impact of working from home on the environment. Is it better or is it worse?
Yeah.
So it's not easy, but as employees move, as you say, outside of that kind of self-contained, very well controlled environment to where it's up to their employees to turn on the heater, turn off the heater, turn on the lights, make the right decisions. Surely those companies like yours, where you're distributed, but you're still trying to hit these, goals of being BCorp certified, that's got to make it harder, isn't it? I mean, what can you share, kind of tips that you can share that helps you in that process?
Yeah, it definitely does make it harder. I mean, what we ended up doing is a couple of things. One, like the co-working space, we had intentionally chose it because they had a renewable energy tariff, and they had some other kind of social principles of how they ran it. But we had to get them to actually provide us documentation that we could submit, which was something that they'd never had to like provide to a tenant before. So that was a challenge to kind of persuading them that they should they should give us a copy of their like energy bill. But that was, I think that's definitely one thing. If you actually, I think now, like when people are going back this year, sort of post-pandemic, and probably a lot of companies are thinking, well, we'll move to some sort of co-working space now instead of having a full office. I think that's just one of the things to look for when you're shopping around co-working spaces is like, are they actually going to support you in providing this sort of documentation? And do they have their own policies to operate that space in a way that is aligned with the way that you would like your business to run? And then on the kind of the personal side for our team members, basically what we started doing is like an annual survey where it's voluntary, but we sort of explain to them why it's important that they actually submit their energy values from their energy bills to us, and we've got a big spreadsheet that we've made where we fill them all in, and then we apportion like part of their energy bills to their working time and basically account that as our energy as a company. And that I think has been quite effective because now we've got nearly everybody in the team submits that information, and then the people who don't, we just average everybody else to sort of complete it. And then we've also, but that then focuses the mind on like, okay, but how can we support them in reducing that? And one of the things we've done is we introduced a policy a few years ago where we give an extra day of annual holiday if you switch your home energy to a renewable energy provider. So, and that's interesting because I mean, it was a bit of a slow start, if I'm being honest. It took quite a long time, but we've now got 100% of our team have renewable energy supply at home. So I think, gradually you can kind of chip away at it. It's not impossible to deal with those things that are sort of slightly outside of your control, but it does make it harder, like you said.
You've touched on, well, there's a number of threads there that kind of come together on a topic I wanted to talk about. So earlier on, you said do a little bit. Earlier on, we talked about that community that you created when you kind of got through that certification process, and also a piece about focusing the mind on these questions and decisions. So quickly from my side, before I really kind of started to focus on this tech with purpose angle, from the, let's call it the outside of the sustainability world, you could kind of look in and you could see everybody as eco warriors, or just, you know, inconvenience to you getting your business done. And there'd be a few people, but really with everything else that was going on in the world, it seemed like it was just a few little annoying things that were happening, but not much.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I noticed as I really kind of stepped into this world, and I don't want it to seem like it's a different world, but stepped into this, is actually how much is going on, and how many good things are going on. And that's really a big part of what this video series is all about, is let people share that as well, start talking about it, and raising the awareness and saying, you know, you don't have to be an eco warrior, you don't have to go and, you know, ditch all of your cars and turn to veganism overnight. But we do need to start talking, and we do need to focus, be more mindful on our decisions and our choices. I mean, there's another thing I'll throw in here as well. There's an app I came across in another piece of work called Climate Court, where you were saying about you know, the questions on the certification process were important because they helped you think about it. Climate Court, you challenge your employers or your friends or your loved ones. You take them to court. it's quite bizarre, but like you said, when you look at it, it's like, well, I know which one I should answer, but if I'm being honest, I'm gonna pick that one. So yeah, I find that I can't change everything overnight. And I want to talk about your website calculator in a minute as well, because that's important. But it's about trying to find those things that you can change, and those small incremental things getting moving forward.
Yeah.
On that point, tell me your thought on that, and then let's talk about that website as well.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that at the end of the day, it would be great if, you know, suddenly the world could change overnight and everything we did was done in a way that's completely harmonious with nature, and and we didn't have to worry about any of like future problems. But like, we all know that's not possible. So, but we also know that it's essential that we do, you know, change the way we're doing things so that we don't create, you know, disasters for the future, which is the track that we're on. And I think that the only way that we can actually reconcile those two kind of really opposing concepts is to say we just need to keep taking steps forward. It doesn't matter how small they are. Any step forward is a step forward. Mm-hmm. And if everybody keeps finding what they can do, whether it's in their personal life, whether it's at work, gradually we'll just keep getting this momentum forwards. And I think it's often the case in life with anything. Like, once you take a step forward, then the next step appears possible. If you look right to the end from the start line, you think, nah, I can never get there. So yeah, I think constant forward steps is the key, isn't it?
Yeah. It's even when you're having kind of challenges in your life and it's really difficult to see, how am I ever going to get through this? It's one day at a time, right? One minute, 1 hour, 1 day at a time. And I think the same thing is true here. I feel like a bit of a hypocrite sometimes because I still have a diesel car. Well, I've got a fairly big family that I need to get around, and that's a diesel car. I need it for that. But I will change it. I am planning on changing that, But on the website point, tell me about your website in a minute. I ran the calculation on my website, and it's a bit okay. But I will make the choice next time. I will go back to my hosting provider and ask them, why are you not using renewable energy, and put the emphasis on that. But also I'll start to think about how I can make changes. But tell me more about that particular website project that you created.
Yeah, sure. So that started a few years ago. And it was actually, if I'm being honest, it was inspired by going through this BCorp assessment and having a whole section in there that asks you about your products that you make and how you've thought about their environmental impact and taken action on it. And we were like, well, we could just skip this section, right? And we make digital stuff. And it was interesting because although we did skip it the first time around, because we just didn't have any information that we could fill in, we had to skip it. It just didn't sit right. It felt like, this doesn't seem right. There must be an impact. Whatever it is, we should know what it is. So we asked around a whole bunch of people that we knew in the industry, and they were like, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It's like digital. no impact. um, but I don't know. We sort of went down that rabbit hole and said, no, we want proof. We want proof. And once we started looking into it, we found that the internet does have a huge, and digital technology in general, I should say, has a huge environmental impact. The internet, so the top line statistic is the internet has a carbon footprint roughly equivalent to Germany. And Germany is the 7th biggest polluter in the world, which is pretty shocking for an industry you think has, most people would think, well, there's no real impact to it. And that's just the carbon footprint. You're not talking about like the materials that have to be mined to build all of the equipment and the infrastructure, and the water use in cooling data centers, and the e-waste from throwing all of this electronic equipment away every 3 years or so. So that footprint is enormous, and I think what's probably more significant is that unlike some other industries that might have a high impact, but it's gradually coming down. Digital is one of the fastest growing sources of energy consumption and emissions, and there's no I haven't seen any study that predicts that plateauing and coming back down again. All the predictions show it just keeps going up and up, because we're just so hungry for data and digital services. And we're outpacing, our demand is outpacing the improvements in efficiency of the technology. So from that, we basically thought, okay, well, this is kind of shocking. We need to apply it to our own work. How can we scale that down to like an individual website or something that we're building? So we did some work, and we did a kind of first version of this, I think about 4 years ago, building the first carbon calculator for a website where you can put a URL in and it will give you an estimate for the carbon emissions of somebody visiting that page. And then obviously you can scale that up to the number of people that visit every month or every year. And we've improved it since, and this year we're going to do another update to it with some newer data. But that's been kind of really a fascinating project for us in learning about A, that there is a real impact and we should take it seriously, and B, like actually, like what can we do about it? And it's interesting how once our team kind of got this idea in their minds, it really focused them, and they've now like really transformed our design and development process to make sure, basically to make everything super efficient. And that's now become a kind of specialism of ours, that we build like super efficient, like high performance websites, even if you don't care about the sustainability stuff. It's now like, it's really state-of-the-art technology, because we've been so focused through this lens of sustainability, like, no, everything must be optimized, that it's actually made us do better work. And I think that's really exciting.
Well, that's fascinating, because you were saying earlier on about, is sustainability good for business? And you were kind of, really kind of working your way through that. But here, what you've done is, by focusing on that and really looking at that, you've created this new niche for your business that you're a leader in.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Ultimately, long term, it has been good for your business, because you created a business from it. It's very interesting, that piece. So first of all, give us the URL. Where do we go and test our website? Nobody test mine, please.
Yeah, sure. So you go to websitecarbon.com, and you can pop in a URL, and it'll give you that estimate of carbon emissions, but it'll also tell you whether or not your hosting provider is registered as having a commitment to using renewable energy as well. So yeah, just pop in a URL. It doesn't have to be yours.
I'll put the URL in at the bottom of the video, and a little disclaimer is that when I first tested it last year, I was on Green Energy. My hosting provider was Green Energy, but I had an issue with them, and I switched to another hosting provider, and now they're not on Green Energy. So I will be talking to them to tell them that they're letting my score down. But just switching gears just a second. These bad boys, these United Nations sustainability goals.
Yes.
I always feel a bit funny putting myself at the side like that, but there we go. Maybe I should do a better graphic presentation. What I found astonishing, really, is how few people are actually aware of these and what they are. And kind of similarly, when I speak to those kind of tech companies who are not really familiar with these, and we talk about their product and what they're doing, their service and their vision, they go, oh, well, actually, I could align to number 3. I could align to number 8, good jobs and economic growth. So people are kind of less aware of them. What's your opinion? A couple of questions here. What's your opinion? Do you think people are generally aware of them? Should they be aware of them? And do you think we're going to get anywhere close to any of these by 2030?
Ooh, big questions. Yeah, I mean, actually, it's interesting. One of our clients is UNICEF, and we actually been doing a project with them about like communicating the Sustainable Development Goals online. And it is interesting. I think that I don't think many people are aware of them. I think most people who are aware of them kind of they work in that world of like sustainability consultants or non-profits that work on specific issues that fit into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But I think outside of that world, they're not well known. And I think they're a really powerful lens to actually say like these are the things that need to happen. And actually there should be wider awareness of them. Part of the problem I think is that it's a bit too complicated. There's almost too many of them, if you know what I mean. Like you held up that sheet with all these colored tiles, and I thought, I can't remember what they all are. Like, you know.
Also, some of them are incredibly lofty, and it makes you think. You know, this one here: no poverty, no hunger.
Yeah.
It feels like, I hate to say it, it feels like that's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So you feel kind of detached from it from that point of view, but you know there is progress being made when you dig into them, and you realize there's sub levels underneath them. You dig into them, some of them are actually being achieved. But anyway, I distracted you. How do you think we're doing with these?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, I'm not the expert on all of them, but I think I don't, if I'm being honest, I don't think that we're going to have solved all of them or many of them by 2030. And I think for the reason that you just said, like, you know, no poverty, no hunger sounds almost impossible. I think there's lots of them that we can make big progress on. But I think, you know, there's been lots of goals set for decades and decades. And here we are, you know, kind of repeating the same sorts of goals, just kicking them another decade down the road. And I think the big one is like the ecological crisis and climate change, where really like that is sort of the foundation of everything. If you don't solve that, then you can't solve the other problems, because everything is built upon the natural world, whether we're aware of it or not. That's the bottom line. And so if we don't solve, you know, if we don't solve that within the next 10 years, which is sort of what the United Nations has said is the time frame that we've really got to make big progress, then we're in serious trouble. So I think for me, I feel like that should be our primary focus, because if you don't solve the foundation, then the house of cards is going to collapse, no matter how much good work you do in all the other areas. And I'm just trying to like stay optimistic and do my little bits of chipping away at it, and hope that collectively, 10 years down the road, we actually say, oh wow, look what we achieved.
Yeah. There was two interesting kind of facts. So I call them facts because I haven't done complete fact checking yet. But the FAO, one of the directors at the FAO, talking about their forestry report, he was saying that we're already 25 years behind hitting the goal we had set to achieve by 2020 in terms of reforestation and deforestation. And then in a call I had earlier this week, somebody said that the latest kind of forecast is we'll hit these goals by 2092.
2092.
And when he said it, the number just went over me, and it was about half an hour later. I said, he said 2092.
Yeah.
So I need to go and check that one, but that was interesting. But we've been rambling on for ages, and it's been fascinating. But let's wrap it up here. But there's one question I always like to ask at the end, just in case we didn't cover something important.
Sure.
Is there anything that you wish I'd asked you, but I didn't, that you want to mention now?
Well, I think maybe just a kind of a final thought, which I touched on at the beginning, was this thing about like challenging the fundamental business model. And I think yes, there's lots of things we can do to make business more sustainable that is good for business, and it's good for the environment, and probably good for society as well. But I think the conversation that's not happening that much is like, but what is the actual business model underneath? Like, you know, does your business model rely on shipping things 5,000 miles on a container ship? And does it rely on having poor people in another country who can make things really cheap so that you can sell them for a profit? Like these really kind of difficult questions, uncomfortable questions, I think are the ones we need to be asking in order for us to achieve those goals in 10 years' time. And I guess I'd really just kind of leave that as a final thought, that we need to we need to start looking deeper.
Okay, very good. So lastly then, where can people go to find out more about you? What's the website address? What's your email address? You don't have to share your email address, but website address, anything you want to share. Some people willingly share their email address. It's okay.
Yeah, sure. So you can find out more about kind of what we're doing at wholegraindigital.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name's Tom Greenwood. I'm not the only Tom Greenwood that owns a web design agency. It's quite a generic name, but you find Tom Greenwood at Wholegrain Digital. You know that's me. And also you can find us on Twitter at @EatWholegrain.
Excellent. Good. Okay. And for everyone watching, if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And there's plenty of other really interesting videos out there. Please also support me on the website. I need this support because of Tom's website. Every time you sign up and you subscribe, I will plant a tree for you. And check out your website on websitecarbon.com, was it?
That's right. Yeah.
Websitecarbon.com, see how many trees you need to plant as well. So thank you so much, Tom, for joining me. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you again.
No, that's all right. It's been a pleasure.